Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Iron Culture. It is Monday. It is approximately 7. Few minutes late. A little bit of technical stuff behind the scenes, but we're pushing through. We're making it happen. Thanks so much for joining us on this Monday night. I am Eric Trexler, as always, joined by the Dr. Eric Helms. Helms was texting me all weekend. He's a huge college football guy. I just want to reiterate, Helms, I agree. A little nervous with Duke getting out to a slow start on offense, but their defense looked fantastic. Offense really came online, got the passing game going in the second half. Very comfortable win over Elon. Love to see that. Ohio State with a tremendous defensive effort, absolutely shutting down Arch Manning. A tremendous battle between two teams. And Helms, you said it first, but I agree. I think we're going to see them playing late into the winter. Keep January open if you want to see them going at it again. But Helms, other than that, how you doing?
I'm doing well, and I didn't feel like I could get a word in edgewise with those texts because you just kept hitting me up about not only the North American powerlifting championships that just recently happened, where both Taylor Atwood and Russell Orhee moved up a weight class and attempted to break the 83 and the 93 kilo weight class records, but also World Games, which just happened in China, a couple of weeks ago, which was the first time that raw powerlifting, not just single ply for the IPF, was there, and some of the world records that were broken and the incredible performances. So, like you, I also anticipated that Taylor Atwood was going to be the one to break the 83 kilo record, having been a little bit longer in the class and not miss it, and then have Russell Orhee actually, after this is true, accidentally flying to the wrong country, last minute getting another flight, flying into the right
The
country,
wrong country. Where was
competing.
this?
Yeah, so I don't want to dwell on it too much because it's a truly honest mistake. Like it was the similar named location, and they both are in the broader North American sphere. They're both
Yeah.
islands that you could host a North American Powerlifting Federation, and it was a genuine mistake. You don't look at kind of the things too quickly. You're focusing on other stuff.
Yeah, for
So I
sure.
don't want to take away from the fact that he actually totaled first time ever. He broke the world record by zero point 0.5 kilos, so I think it was 918. And not only that, but he weighed in because he was traveling and a little stressed out at 91.8, if I recall correctly. So it's the first drug-free IPF 93 kilo, 10 times body weight total. So that's a big deal. So big shout out to Russ Orhee, the whole sport's advancing. He moved up from the 83s, and that world record setting total may snag him an invite to the next Sheffield for an epic 93 kilo weight class showdown. So that's probably one of the biggest pieces of news, but also just the fact that raw powerlifting is in the World Games. This is the equivalent of our Olympics here in powerlifting, and that happened. A really unique format. They combine, each two weight classes, so they kind of have like a light, middle, and heavyweight setup, and then they do it on formula, so it's IPF points. But there were some real good battles there. A little bit of redemption for Tiffany Chapone. She just recently lost the world title, coming in second. And also Megan Lee Smith here from New Zealand actually managed to come out ahead of Evie Corrigan for the first time ever in that same, lightweight weight class, but among one another. There was, I think, a 5 kilo spread, and Megan Lee Smith came out on top. I think she totaled 482.5 at 52 kilos, just a monstrous total. And that was your top three medalists. So anyway, there's obviously a lot more to talk about, but I know you have already fully discussed this with me via text, just like I fully discussed Duke basketball with you.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, football
but
for
one
now.
thing,
But yeah.
football, that I got it right in
Yeah,
a
same
text
thing.
at least. Whatever, sports.
Yeah.
Trex, another thing though, powerlifting. We're deepening our roots in the iron culture.
Yes, we are participating deeply in the culture, and we are doing that via partnership with what would you call them? I mean, they are a staple. They are
Yeah.
a pillar in the culture of iron. Fun fact, Helms. So I actually, Iron Culture is the name of the show, but I actually feel really lucky that when I was most immersed in strength sport in my life, I really was in a cultural hub of the iron game. So I went to college in Columbus, Ohio, where you have not just the Arnold Classic every year, especially, and even back when there was only one, they didn't have the whole all over the world kind of deal. So the Arnold Classic was there. West Side Barbell was there. A number of different companies that were really staples in terms of filling your gym bag with gear. We're not going to mention all the companies. We're only going to mention one. Our dear partners that we're forming this little bond with here. So when I first got into powerlifting, living in Columbus, Ohio, where did I go? When I first wanted to get straps and wrist wraps, of course, I went no place other than Elite FTS.
There you go, out in London, Ohio, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, you're close to home with it. And for those who recall, we had episode 190 all the way back. Actually, it was the end of September, so about 3 years ago ish. We had Dave Tate come on Iron Culture podcast.
The one, the only.
He is one of the one and the only. He's been in the game, putting out fantastic content. This is someone who I've just been impressed with because he's evolved, he's stayed curious, he's stayed humble, yet the impact he's had certainly would not require that. One of the few people who went and actually has trained at the West Side Barbell and has shared so much information and has created a really high quality brand. So after we had Dave Tate on back in 2022, he was like, hey man, let me know the next time you're in the States and you're somewhere near Ohio and we'll get you on Table Talk. And I was floored. And that opportunity finally happened just about a few days prior to when we all did the SNA conference, because it just kind of worked out. I was going to go do some filming and recording with Mike Israetel down in the greater Detroit area. And then I was going to go to Texas. And I was like, those are only a 5-hour drive difference. So let's line these up, bam, bam, bam. So that was a pretty cool little pilgrimage I did earlier this year. But that was a really cool interview, and big shout out to Dave Tate. Big shout out to Elite FTS for having us on. And one thing that people may not know is that we all had a pinch me moment way back when we started Mass, because one of the very first people to sign up and who turned us down to offer him a free membership after we saw it was Dave Tate. So it's been it's like a true privilege and honor to be on the podcast, have him, and to do this partnership. So for all you listeners, this is pretty on brand for Iron Culture. We do have a 10% discount that you can get on the vast majority of items at Elite FTS. Probably some of the things that are most popular are their bands, but they've also got the yoke bar. They've got the shoulder saver pads. They've got straps. They've got wrist plates, wrist wraps. Excuse me. So if you can place it in a bag or load plates on it, Elite FTS has it. The bands are obviously a no-brainer. They can fit so many roles, from warming up to those of us who went through COVID, training themselves, and they're made really well. They have a layered construction method, so unlike a lot of bands out there, they will not get messed up. So that code is MRR10. That's capital M, capital R, 10, and you can use that as a discount code. You guys can use that right now. I'll remind you at the end of the show as well. But yeah, just a real privilege and pleasure. There's very few, as you guys know from Iron Culture lore, we have had very few partnerships that aren't like with ourselves. Obviously, Iron Culture presented by Mass is hilarious because it's like Mass presented by Mass. Yeah. But we've also done partnerships with the SNA, Sports Nutrition Association, which Eric and I are both on the board of. Correct. So it's basically
there's one shell corporation that exists offshore in a place with very loose banking regulations, no tax code to speak of, no extradition laws. So that is essentially the hub through which all of our partnerships previously have worked.
That's right. Yeah. Is it legal? I don't know. That's what we have our very real legal team in Delaware. And yeah, you know what? My Delaware-based lawyers say we're fine. Yeah. So
in the nondescript offshore country that it's all based out of, it's completely legal.
Yeah, and if we don't actually know what that country is, plausible deniability, right, Trex?
Exactly. Yeah. No, I tell you what, Elite FTS, like I said, they're legit, and a lot of times, like a good endorsement you can give a company is, I personally use their products. But how about this endorsement? Is I had the good enough sense to begin using their products in 2011. And by
Bam.
the way, the wrist wraps and the straps held up for an eternity. So, if
Hmm.
nothing else, it's almost we should talk to Dave. It's bad business. You can't let them last that long. You got to make sure people come back to it, get
No.
more and more. But no, those things lasted an eternity. And they never broke down. I just moved too many times and couldn't find them.
Yeah, you just lost them, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you go,
you will lose them before they wear
absolutely.
down. Yes.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, what would you say the realistic expectation of wrist straps would be? 2 years? Like
Yeah. I mean,
you wouldn't
yeah,
be mad as a customer, right?
yeah,
So, Dave, just make them last 4 years. You
yeah.
double the expectation. This whole time, like cockroaches wearing wrist straps after the nuclear holocaust, not necessary. Not a good business model, but I understand. He's just that type of guy, and
Yeah.
Elite FTS is that type of brand.
100%. All right, Helms, we ready to dive into the content for tonight?
Absolutely. Let's get to some Q&A.
Beautiful. Yeah. As always, we appreciate the folks who submitted their questions. Well, first of all, we love them all the time in the live chat, after hours, wherever you like to submit them, we like them. Of course, if you want to submit a question, one way is to join us live on YouTube Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Another way is to go to massresearchreview.com/ironculture and submit your questions there anytime that they come to mind. Now, we got Helms. I've talked about this many times on the show. We often get kind of waves of questions where you say, uh-oh, someone made some content somewhere. So we got a little wave of questions about collagen. And I know this is something that the
Mm.
both of us have looked into previously. I know I've written a thing or two about it in mass. I'm sure you've answered this question many a time across many different contexts. But apparently, the barbell medicine guys have been going on about collagen supplementation. Going on about has a negative connotation. I'm just reading the question. But they've been
Yeah.
talking about collagen supplementation, saying it's not helpful for tendon issues and health. And again, this is verbatim. I don't want to say that that's exactly what they said in their quote. Can you please discuss whether or not it is recommended specifically for tendon issues and for health? But yeah, we got a few questions about collagen and what its applications could be. Sometimes people talk about it in terms of tendons and joints. Sometimes they talk about it in terms of building muscle, even. Sometimes talking about hair, skin, and nails. And lately, I've seen multiple folks having debates about this. So not just the barbell medicine folks, but I've seen no fewer than three pretty big, evidence-based fitness types with actually some areas of disagreement. So it's an
Hmm.
interesting and lively area of focus and debate right now. Helms, do you have any strong feelings about this? Or do you want me to take a crack at it first?
No, I wouldn't say I have strong feelings about it, but I will say a couple of points. Um, First is there is enough accumulating research on this that there was actually a meta-analysis published in Sports Medicine at the end of 2024 by Bischoff and colleagues. I don't know if you're aware of that one, Trex.
That was made actually after I think the last time I wrote about collagen. I think that came
Okay,
out
well,
afterward.
you can go over it if you want. Obviously, you're far more qualified to discuss meta-analysis, but I don't know if you've dug into it. But I'd be happy to talk about that. And then if you want to talk about some of the more mechanistic side of it and maybe why glycine makes more sense and potentially even indicating that we don't see consistent findings between the studies that are necessarily industry funded versus not. There's a few things to unpack here.
Yeah, why don't you give us a quick kind of surface level overview of the meta if you feel comfortable, or if not, I can kind of dive
Sure.
in because before that I had kind of done a little deep dive into the literature. But yeah, what do you have from the meta?
Yeah, so the meta was conducted with data through the end of 2023, and it was looking at normal to overweight people who are adults over 17, regularly exercising and taking collagen peptide supplementation for at least 8 weeks, except for one 3-week trial, which only included maximal strength. So In total, there was 768 participants across these studies, and they did actually find a significant effect in favor of long-term collagen supplementation for fat-free mass, tendon morphology, muscle architecture, and maximal strength. The tendon morphology was what we would describe as a quote-unquote moderate effect. Fat-free mass, muscle architecture were small. Maximal strength would probably actually be more on the trivial side of things. And then for those of us who care about, power, there was some reactive strength index changes. Some of these p-values are pretty borderline. Like that reactive strength one is just barely clearing that 0.05. And overall, if you look at the grade, basically model of certainty, which is, how much certainty do we have in these results? How much heterogeneity is there? And what is the quality of the studies? It ranges from very low certainty for tendon morphology and mechanical properties, low certainty for everything else, and then moderate certainty for body composition, which actually kind of surprised me. Some things to consider is that the comparison, like collagen, is straight up a low quality protein. That's something we need to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Right.
And particularly low quality. Like we're not talking about like,
Yes.
oh, wheat protein, corn protein, collagen.
Yeah.
Huge gap between collagen protein and any food you eat.
Yes. With that said, I do think it is important to understand what it is compared to, because if you take a high enough dose of collagen, while that specific protein source itself won't be used for the useful things we care about, like body composition, it may quote unquote free up other amino acids because it does take time to digest. It depends on when you take it, etc. So this could just be simply an effect of having a higher protein intake. Another thing I would say is there are some data that indicate that the sponsored and funded studies more often find effects of collagen than the ones that are not. Now, here's a really important thing, and I want to give a shout out to Sigma Nutrition Radio. Alan Flanagan and Danny talked about this really well recently, that does not necessarily indicate a direct influence of the funders or anything nefarious. Many times, what you are seeing when you look at funded versus unfunded studies is different selections of what is actually being assessed. What are the choices that are made for what are the outcomes? Sometimes it is simple as once we have funding, we can look at more reliable outcome measures, things that are we can have more precision for, you can spend more money on. The money allows a better measurement or a more direct measurement. Other times, there could be choices to measure things which are more likely to change, but not necessarily the direct measure of outcome. I don't think that's the case in this one. So just be aware that when you do hear, hey, the funded studies find significant effects more often than the unfunded ones, that is not necessarily always an indictment of the authors or an influence of bias. Sometimes it is that, hey, money enables us to do research which is more precise, have more participants, and be more likely to find an effect. And someone's only going to fund a study if they think there's a likelihood to find an effect. So just keep that in mind. That's all I've got, Trex. I am also dubious, even though this meta-analysis exists, it doesn't mean that we're looking at a huge body of research, and I think the grade evidence indicates that a little bit. It's not appearing in my third editions as, hey, this is something you should definitely take. I actually like to see multiple metas, most of the time these days, and a more up-to-date one. This has really only been out for a bit, so just keep that in mind. There's not a tremendous number of studies included in this meta-analysis. I think there was like under 20. I think it was 19.
Yeah.
So that's not nothing. Don't get me wrong, but it's very plausible based upon the great evidence that some of these findings could change over time with more data.
Yeah, no, that's a great overview. The thing with that meta is, like I said, I haven't dove back into this topic for quite some time. And with a meta, you can pretend to assess it on the fly while you're also podcasting and running the technology and keeping the live stream going, but you'd be fooling only yourself. To really dig into a meta, you really have to start getting at some of the questions you asked. So, for example, collagen compared to what? then you start thinking in what population or populations. And you
Yep.
start thinking, okay, what were the specific inclusion exclusion criteria? You start getting down this kind of long list of technicalities. How did they deal with, especially on the strength side? Let's say you have a study that measured bench press, squat, and deadlift. Well, are you going to enter that into the model 3 times without any kind of statistical correction? Hopefully not. Hopefully you've done some, there are multiple appropriate methods to deal with that, but you better do something, right? And many meta-analyses don't. So I'm actually thinking that might be a good paper for me to dive into for the upcoming issue of the Mass Research Review. Honestly, I'm still looking for
It's hot.
that perfect paper for the upcoming month, and this actually might be it because there's clearly interest in it, and I think it'd be valuable to dive into that meta. But for now, based on the last time I dove into this and kind of did a little assessment of the literature so far, I did kind of acknowledge in my article that there was it's not completely unjustifiable to suggest that there have been some studies out there, fairly large-ish randomized controlled trials indicating that collagen supplementation in certain contexts, may have an increase or may be associated with an increase in fat-free mass, likely due to connective tissue more so than muscle. There have been some instances where participants in those types of studies have reported improvements related to, how they're feeling in terms of their joints, specifically more research in like the area of like osteoarthritis, for example. So basically, I acknowledged in my last article, if you felt compelled to say, hey, I want to be optimistic about collagen, there is justification for that. And one of the things that really intrigues me is I've seen some chatter. I haven't dug into the studies deeply enough, but some chatter to suggest that, normally we think about, we eat a protein, it gets broken down to its individual amino acids. Those are absorbed into the bloodstream. Then we reassemble them into what we need. I've seen some chatter alluding to evidence which I've not read yet, indicating that there are some larger peptides that we do absorb into the bloodstream intact from collagen, which would certainly be a very intriguing thing and would potentially lend some kind of mechanistic support for the idea that actually there is something unique and special about collagen versus just eat enough protein and let your body build what it's going to build, right? So I do want to
Yeah.
acknowledge that, there are, the way I put it, I'll just read it verbatim, very short blurb here. There's some evidence to suggest that collagen supplementation can facilitate collagen synthesis and may be beneficial for individuals with joint pain or other issues related to connective tissues. This body of literature is small and it's not universally embraced by sports nutrition experts, but there's at least some evidence linking collagen supplementation to increased rates of collagen synthesis, increased fat mass, and attenuation of joint pain. So early preliminary stuff. It's controversial. Experts, like I said, in sports nutrition and in the realm of like joint health, like actual practitioners who work with people rehabbing joint injuries day in and day out, have very diverse opinions about it. And what I said in my article is like, I'm not a connective tissue expert. So I said, don't take it with or do take this with a grain of salt. But if I was dealing with a connective tissue injury, collagen would not be my first move.
Yeah.
The biggest things that you can do if you're worried about a particular, normally people are not thinking like, I want to bolster all my connective tissue in every way. Usually when people come with this question, it's like, I've got this nagging thing, tendon, ligament, joint, whatever. What should I do about it? And without question, the biggest things you can do for that are going to be eat enough protein, don't get scurvy, because vitamin C is needed for synthesizing collagen. That's literally like if you've ever seen like an old movie, there was a really great mini series called The Terror, which was on like
Great
AMC, I
show.
think. Yeah, so it was like an old ship on a voyage through the frigid Arctic waters. And this was, back when if you were a sailor, scurvy was like a very legitimate concern you would have. And I tell you what, if you want to if you want to make a short list of the most grisly ways to die, scurvy would definitely be high on that list for me because your body needs vitamin C in order to create collagen, which is going to be necessary for like every connective tissue. And so like when you have a chronic severe deficiency of vitamin C, your body literally just starts falling apart.
Yep.
Gums, everything. So it truly is grisly. So what if I had a connective tissue injury? Like I said, eat enough protein, get enough vitamin C. You're going to have the building blocks necessary there. But the biggest thing by far is going to be in the acute injury phase, leave it alone, let it get through that kind of acute healing process. After that, have a smart approach to loading it the right way. Because just like anything else, if we're trying to rehab tissues, usually, and you can get down tissue to tissue into the details, but in a lot of cases, when people are coming in with a joint ouchie and they want to rehab it, it's about giving it an appropriate amount of load, giving it that stimulus to actually lay down new tissue and new collagen, making sure you have those kind of basic essential building blocks there from a nutritional perspective, and then managing that progression of that load until you're going from rehabbing the joint into return to play. So those are the big rocks by far. In terms of other little things you might put in the mix, like that's where you might say, well, I don't know, like I'm interested in collagen. There's some evidence for, some against. It doesn't seem to be a particularly dangerous supplement. It's not like through the roof in terms of price. So I would never fault someone for saying, maybe as I'm doing this rehab, maybe I'll check with my clinician to make sure they don't have any red flags, but maybe I'll throw that into the mix with some wishful thinking. I think that's potentially a justifiable application. But one of the things I also have mentioned previously is you can make a decent case mechanistically that the main kind of bottleneck for our ability to produce glycogen at higher levels is probably glycine content in the diet.
Collagen.
What's that?
You said glycogen, but collagen.
Yes,
Just to be
yes,
clear.
collagen for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Late in the
No
evening,
worries.
brain melting, you know the drill. But yeah,
I'm right there with you.
for producing as he slams the caffeine. Yeah, you're trying to produce this collagen. You can make a justifiable argument that glycine is kind of that limiting factor, creating that bottleneck. So in the past, I've said I'm not so sure that glycine supplementation might not get you most of the way. The real question there just comes down to the extent that some of those intact peptides are making it to the bloodstream and floating around, how much does that really matter compared to just give me, the glycine, give me all those building blocks, I'll assemble it. Vitamin C is a cofactor and we'll be good to go. So that's an area for further study. But one of the reasons I've mentioned glycine being potentially an alternative is, maybe you could have 3 to 5 grams of glycine instead of 10 to 15 grams of collagen. Give your body what it needs to create that collagen. And the reason that you might consider that is there is some suggestion, like I said, collagen is not widely viewed as like a super risky supplement to take, but it can increase your risk of kidney stones, and it's specifically from the hydroxyproline that's in there. And certainly you would not have that similar concern if you were just taking glycine, which also tends to I would imagine probably mixes better, may be more cost effective. I haven't checked the prices these days, but all that is to say, if you don't want to go the collagen route, maybe a little extra glycine in the diet could help. But without question, it's all about making sure you recover enough in that acute recovery phase and then loading the tissue appropriately. I will say, Helms, whenever you talk collagen, people will then, ask. I've gotten so many questions over the years about hair, skin, nails, that element of it. And Helms, I just don't know a doggone thing about hair or skin or nails. Nails grow, hair grows for a while, but then when you mature, it stops. If you're a virtuous man like myself, you should have less hair than you used to, in my opinion. But yeah, I'm not the person to go to for hair, skin, and nails. I have
That's
zero
fair.
to offer.
That's fair. And I think that was a fantastic summary. And one thing I can offer is the perspective of an athlete myself, because sometimes people want to hear, like, what is my quote unquote evidence based take, and then what would I do personally? And that sometimes is different. So I got a lot of questions after our Yohimbine caffeine and ephedrine, caffeine, aspirin kind of convo about like, oh wow, that seemed like loose and fast recommendations. And I was like, hold on. I don't believe we made a single recommendation in that podcast. We were informing you about this really interesting data. And I think it's really important to understand that that can go the other way too. So I think, like you said, there are some gaps in the data. There's some assumptions you need to make. There's a justifiable way that you could supplement with collagen. I'll tell you why I am not at the point where I would take it, even though I've got a meta-analysis in front of me that's saying, hey, enhanced fat-free mass. Are you crazy? Thought you're trying to compete at the world level of bodybuilding, Eric. Here's why. You can find similar meta-analyses on some outcomes we care about with branched-chain amino acids.
Yeah.
And the reason why that I don't take it is that if you look at every single comparison that's ever been made, or that's a positive effect for branched-chain amino acids, it's compared to placebo that is typically like a maltodextrin. And in the case of collagen, like I said, it is boosting your overall protein intake, which I think is low, even though the quality is, not great. In fact, it's bad. In the context of an overall mixed diet, I do think that could make the utility of the other proteins in your diet effective. So there's that. And the reason why that's relevant, 15 out of the 19 studies in this meta-analysis used 15 to 30 grams of collagen. So we are talking about a comparable dose that you see in protein supplementation research, which if you look at that, like there's the classic 2012 meta-analysis from Cermak, similar dosages, basically a scoop of whey in most cases, or a scoop of soy or a scoop of casein, does result in better fat-free mass outcomes. So I'm not convinced that that's not explaining the majority of the effect we're seeing. So I'd want to see that. I would actually want to see collagen being compared to in let's say nitrogen equated conditions. That's where I would want to see it. Show me that I can't just get this same benefit from consuming a high protein diet, or that I get it on top of a high protein diet, and I will take it. And that hasn't been shown in BCAA, hasn't been shown in HMB, all these other amino acid analog supplements. It's just not there. And the last thing I will say is that maybe the whole speculation of glycine is the way to go. But if it is true, and here's why I want to see some mechanistic work, that there are intact peptides that you do absorb instead of breaking down collagen fully, then you could make at least a mechanistic theoretical argument that maybe you would want to do collagen in place of glycine. Or we need at least head-to-head comparisons of the two.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing I would add, and I think those are the reason why I have that high threshold and high bar is not just because I don't want to waste money. It's also because I would want to find a third-party tested collagen supplement, So you just have to think about all these things. There is not a neutral effect of taking a supplement. There is always a risk. And in certain supplement industries, markets, whether you know the manufacturer, if it's you are quite literally rolling the dice with not even just is it like, oh, I don't care if I get some small amount of anabolics in my thing, or I'll even take a little bit. No, we're talking about potential contamination, harmful effects, or just not even being there. You're actually not getting collagen at all. Now you got me saying glycogen.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are the last tidbits I would add to this, just to make people think about what practical decision would you want to make, and then from at least from my perspective, I won't speak for you, what I would need to see before I pulled the trigger to become an adopter.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you mentioned there's the difference between like assessing the evidence versus also just saying, well, what would you do or what do you do? I would say that in terms of injury, I've been there plenty, and I've never once reached for glycogen. God, doggone it.
It's tough.
Never once reached for collagen.
Yep.
Like you said, I'm just not quite there where I feel like it would really move the needle in a very impactful way for me. Happy to be wrong about that, but the research needs to be done again. And
yeah.
I'd love to see, like you said, a good head-to-head. If I could do like a 3-arm trial, I'd say let's do, isonitrogenous. We've got collagen versus a pretty standard dietary protein versus a pretty standard dietary protein with a little bit of extra glycine. And that should really help us figure out, especially if we're equating the glycine content of the collagen arm and the protein plus glycine arm, if there is some kind of magic in the sauce where those, little peptide fractions are actually getting into the bloodstream and doing something useful. I've seen some some speculation that they play an important role in signaling additional collagen, deposition and growth and whatnot. Depositing more collagen and building more
Yeah.
collagen. If that's the case, that would be a really great way to kind of show, hey, there actually is a practical effect of this beyond just, hey, looks like some of those peptides survive into the bloodstream. That's kind of a piece of trivia, which is interesting, but you got to go a little further for kind of convincing me that this is going to be worth my while. All right, Helms. Got some questions in the chat here. This is an interesting one that I've not thought of much. So, Helms, I'm going to throw this to you because you are a resident Olympic lifter. So,
Oof.
there's been very interesting research into the effectiveness of different volumes and frequencies for hypertrophy and strength. Are there any data regarding training volumes and frequencies specifically for power development? So Olympic lifting, jumping, and throwing. When it comes to volume and frequency, do we have any kind of heuristic or benchmarks that we shoot for to kind of maximize that development?
Yeah, there is less work in this area, but there is some for sure. There's actually a classic study that looked at moderate, low, and high volumes in junior elite Olympic weightlifters that was done in the mid 2000s. And they actually found, I'll find the study in a bit, but because I can't remember the name of the author off the top of my head, even though I've been citing it for quite literally my whole career. But they found, I think, similar effects across groups with the greatest mean differences, standardized mean differences, effect sizes, if you will, in the moderate groups, which is pretty interesting. And they looked at two different comparisons. They looked at the percentage of lifts over 90% of 1RM in the snatch, clean and jerk, and back squat, and then they looked at the total number of lifts. And I think the reason why this is something we do actually need to study, specifically the Olympic lifts, is because they're quite different than the power lifts and other bodybuilding movements in that you almost are never performing the eccentric. You're dumping the bar. So the amount of fatigue that would be incurred is a lot less. It's like concentric only for the most part. And I think they're heavily velocity dependent compared to the other lifts and mobility dependent. So your ability to get deep into a snatch and pull is directly related to how high do you have to pull the bar. And I think they're really interesting because the gap between men and women in Olympic weightlifting is a little narrower than it is in powerlifting. And I suspect that is specifically because women can typically get deeper. So they don't have to pull it as high. So some of those strength disparities get made up by the fact that women typically are more mobile than men on average. But anyway, all of those things aside, if the question is about like general power training versus Olympic weightlifting, there may be differences, which I think is worth noting. And I don't know if so yeah, what is the question specifically, Trex? I guess that's my question back at you.
Yeah. The question was just, first of all, is there evidence regarding, kind of optimal, frequency and volume for power development? And I think, an interesting element would just be like when you were preparing to compete in Olympic lifting, what was your approach in terms of, your frequency and your volume, especially for the power oriented training you were doing?
Yeah, so good question. Yeah, so I think first some good research. Those studies were by Gonzalez Badillo. If you look up Gonzalez Badillo weightlifting volume, you can find both. It's 2005, 2006. Good studies. Not huge, but it's rare that you get high-level strength athletes that you can look at, especially robust young junior lifters who you should be able to handle a lot, and seeing kind of that a little bell curve, or at least diminishing returns maybe. But it didn't even look particularly convincing that there was an increase in strength when you went higher volumes. And notably, if we look at the Pellin meta regression on strength data, which I think would mirror power, I would be my assumption. you do see an earlier and more sharp diminishing returns than hypertrophy because we're looking at skill development. Now, when I was embedded in weightlifting culture, and I was for a while, I did Olympic weightlifting from 2012 to 2014, and then from 2020 to 2021. And I've actually been involved for a long time. Like Olympic Weightlifting New Zealand has contracted me for some of the training camps to talk on nutrition, and I'm just interested in the sport. If there's a barbell involved, I'm keen, right? So long as they don't do silly things with it and go run. So sorry, CrossFit.
Yeah.
Not quite as keen on that one. But anyway, it is really common to have much higher training frequencies in Olympic weightlifting compared to powerlifting and bodybuilding. And some of that is because you can, with, again, that lack of eccentric component, the fact that you're typically doing singles, doubles, and triples. There's very little training to quote unquote failure. If you miss a lift, it's not because you can't grind it out. It's because you can't pull it high enough to get under it. So it just kind of goes doop doop and you miss, right? So not uncommon for what we would describe as probably a high level intermediate. Because this is an Olympic sport, you can actually look at, where is someone going. If they're competing at the national level in their country, or if they're potentially competing internationally, it is almost normal for them to be training sometimes more than daily. And this is because it is such a skillful lift that deliberate practice and getting in more reps is not just I'm trying to actively build more power or get stronger, but I'm trying to perfect things with my technique. So it's very difficult with Olympic weightlifting to call it pure power training because you can do like med ball chest passes, slams, jump training, plyometrics, which don't have nearly the technical component to them, and you would probably benefit from a lower volume, would be my assumption. And there's actually some data on that than what you could potentially benefit from and what is done historically and traditionally and even across, different more intensity or volume-based focuses. What you will typically see is high intensity, high frequency, or high volume, high frequency in the Olympic weightlifting world compared to what we would consider in bodybuilding and powerlifting. So you typically see people capping out around 10 sessions a week, having a couple morning, evening, and very intelligent placement of we're just working on jerks from blocks, so we get some recovery there. We're just doing some light stuff. This is going to be a volume accessory bodybuilding session, and we're not going to do that on when we're going to do snatches. We need to be loose type of deal. So I never got up to that high of a training volume, but I was training 6 days a week with when I was doing Olympic lifting, and one day I wasn't coming in twice. I'd get in some technique work in the morning and then like some bodybuilding work in the evening. So, and it just worked out better that way. And we didn't have a team training on Sundays. So, but yeah, when I looked at some of the folks, I had the pleasure of training with some of the best lifters in New Zealand. I got to train alongside Tracy Lambrix, who represented New Zealand at the Olympics, Mark Spooner, who represented New Zealand at the Olympics, and several Commonwealth champions, and they were training more than daily at that level. But yeah. I wouldn't say it was because they were trying to become more powerful. It's because they were trying to become more skilled. So I think the power data would probably mirror the strength data. The reason being is that whenever you're talking about power, it's essentially some point along the force velocity spectrum, right? Or the load velocity spectrum in a more practical sense. Whether you're doing bodyweight training or whether you're throwing implements, and I know a lot of throwers as well. So it is not that dissimilar to what you'd be doing for your like main movement in a given strength sport.
Yeah, and it's interesting with power as well because like we're used to, you and I, coming from the bodybuilding world, it's like get your volume in by route X, Y, or Z, right? There's so much latitude with bodybuilding programming. And it's like, well, if I want to do it this many sessions, that many sessions, I'll figure it out. But with power training, there's a certain level of fatigue at which it's just off the menu. It's like you're not going to be able to get good power training, beyond like a certain level of fatigue within the session or, from session to session. So like you really do, to achieve those really high power outputs, have to have some degree of like freshness and management of How frequently am I doing this and with what volume? And then when you layer in, the technical aspects of what as well, it becomes, there's the technique stuff versus the pure power stuff. And the pure power stuff, you can't just say, well, I'm going to do X sets worth of Y repetitions. And if they're ugly, they're ugly. If they're slow, they're slow. It's like, no, you can't do them slow, So it is kind of a different set of calculus for making sure that you're not just focused on accumulating the training quality for that particular outcome is of just like utmost importance, which is for people who are transitioning from a bodybuilding style training. That is a little bit of a change in the overall kind of conceptualization of it's not just about getting this in, it's about doing it properly,
Yeah. Yeah. So just to give some people some more specific recommendations based upon the literature, probably the best data we have on this is a great meta-analysis that was done by Paul Swinton. This is another one of those people in that top tier, that you describe yourself as a bench warmer for. I'm not sure where he'd be at, but he's definitely in the NBA of stats of sports science.
Yeah.
I think he actually has one of his degrees in math. I could be wrong about that, but Paul Swinton, awesome dude, can bench over 500 pounds and does stats with the best of them.
Damn.
But this is a huge dose modeling study. They looked at basically studies published all the way from 1962 to 2018, looking at anything related to how does strength conditioning impact outcomes in relevant performance. So it had 295 studies with 535 study groups, 6,710 participants. They looked at basically models that predicted performance based upon volume, intensity, you name it, frequency, rest periods, and they specifically were looking at outcomes like such as strength, but also things like vertical jump performance, and that was most likely maximized with like explosive lifting around like 30% of 1RM. And then if we're talking about power in a more force dominant spectrum, typically with low to moderate loads in the 40 to 70% of 1RM range. So you're getting a little more force. And then if we're specifically talking about Olympic weightlifting applications, then it is much more load dependent and starts to mirror what we would describe as probably strength training, because effectively you are training for strength with Olympic weightlifting. It's just the movements themselves must have a given velocity to be completed, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I think people get a little too constrainy when they talk about power. When they, in this kind of context, they think of it as a distinct thing, but everything has a force times a velocity over a work over time, whether it's a 1RM or whether it's just walking. So I just think that's important to kind of understand. But in terms of the volumes, you're generally seeing like the number of foot contacts. If we're talking about plyometrics, high volume is considered 120 or higher, and your mid-range is 80 to 120, less than 80 is low volume, and you get diminishing returns from higher volumes, but there is still that positive effect overall. Ballistic lifting is basically 1 to 7 plus sets when you look across the literature, and again, kind of same thing. You start to see diminishing returns with higher volumes. So that's kind of the general take home. It's lower volumes than we would talk about if we were discussing hypertrophy training, similar to strength, maybe a little different, and then it should be very specific to what you're trying to achieve. Velocity specificity is, I think, the main way you should think about it, as well as probably vector and joint angles. Those are two other things I would think about a lot.
Yeah. Nice. All right, we got a couple questions. Speaking of power, a couple questions about creatine. Yep. One, I'm not familiar with this, but someone said that they were getting on creatine, and they had questions about urination frequency. And so I assumed that I was going to read it, and they're going to say, hey, I've been on creatine and I pee a lot. And it's like, well, you probably were drinking a lot, because everyone says if you get on creatine, you need to drink like 7 gallons of water a day. I don't know if that's still popular advice people are throwing out there, but you really don't, folks. It's not a big deal. But they were saying they can't help but notice dropping. So they're actually peeing less on creatine, but drinking to the same level of thirst. Is this something that you've ever heard of in practice?
No, frankly, but
Yeah.
I definitely have heard of people gaining about 1 to 2% of their body weight over time once they're fully creatine loaded.
Yeah.
And I could see someone in the acute phase of doing it experiencing that.
Yeah.
If they are actively retaining more water, they might urinate a little bit less. I wouldn't expect it to persist though. So if this is
Right.
happening for up to a month while taking a low dose, like 3 grams, in a relatively large person, wouldn't surprise me,
Yeah.
or at least it's plausible. If it's still happening, it's a little weird.
Yeah, the thing that really caught my attention was just like when you think of the magnitude of like net weight retention per day. To me, it'd
Mm,
be very very unexpected if it cut your urine frequency by 40%. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
that seems
yeah.
high to me. So I agree. Like conceptually, like at least in a directional nature, I could see like, oh yeah, well if you're drinking the same amount and you're going to be storing a little bit more water, that would make sense. What's staying in the body isn't leaving as urine in that immediate kind of saturation phase. But it is something I'd say like if that persists and it really is like you feel like a 40% reduction in urine output, that is not what I would expect as being a typical creatine response. So yeah, I'm not sure what to make of that. Something
The
I
only thing I can think of, Trex, is maybe if they started taking creatine as well as an electrolyte supplement around the same time, which isn't that
mm,
uncommon.
yeah, yeah, that's possible.
Then you're also changing your sodium balance, which might result in more water retention, and that can make a big difference. Like if you have a really salty day, you might drop easily half of your urinations.
Yeah,
If you're salt sensitive. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, so it could be some electrolyte stuff, could be a little bit more retention of fluid, could be a lot of different things. But yeah, I agree with you. I would keep an eye on it and try to like probably explore if there's anything else that I might have subtly changed. 'Cause a lot of times you find when someone goes on a new supplement and then you start asking more questions, it's like, well, what led to you going on that supplement? And it's like, well, I decided I was finally going to tweak, get everything dialed
Hmm.
up. And so the supplement was a part of this broader change of like, I'm going to change, some of the beverages I consume every day, some of the foods I'm eating, my training schedule. Like a lot of times the supplement is kind of just tagging along with this broader change of behaviors. So that's something that's worth exploring as well. But in terms of is that a common and often cited change that's experienced, I would say no. But maybe do a little assessment of other things that may have changed and just keep an eye on it. Uh, a question here was about creatine dosage. And so the question was, Helms, you and I, we're in the iron culture. We know creatine, you do 5 grams a day, right? For most of creatine's history, you grab the old teaspoon, plop, and that's it. But we also read the literature, and we know a lot of in the literature, it's often dosed by body mass, right? So one of the common dosages you'll see is about 0.07 grams of creatine per kilogram of body mass, which basically ends up being a 5 gram dose for your quote unquote average kind of reference 70 kilogram individual. The question was, should we really be doing that on the extremes of body size? So if someone is, very, very underweight, should we necessarily scale down their creatine dose to like 1.5 grams a day? Or if someone is, much higher on the weight spectrum, do they really need to be, taking, 4 scoops of creatine a day? And I would say, frankly, no. I mean, if we're talking about a maintenance dose, I would probably say that the boundaries to me in terms of like what is actually useful, necessary, and non-wasteful, I'd say the boundaries probably exist between, and this is like kind of a vibe. I'm not going to tell you that I've like crunched the numbers on this, but I don't know, probably 3 to 7 grams represents the spectrum of dosages for like a daily dose if the whole point is to support muscle performance. How do you feel about that general range, Helms?
I don't disagree, and I think there's a lot of discussion of dose around creatine right now, primarily because of the cognitive
Yeah.
potential benefits, and like the data is not nearly strong enough or prolific enough for us to make clear recommendations there. But when it does seem to be more effective, whether we're talking about TBI recovery or mitigation of prospective effects or sleep impairment, and basically rescuing some of the cognitive effects. You see better effects when you're talking about 20-gram doses in a given day.
Yeah.
So I think somewhat, I don't think you need that much eventually to be getting all the positive effects on muscle. And I think just so the question asker is aware, a lot of the discussion of these higher doses or different doses is kind of a side effect of people talking about taking higher doses due to the cognitive effects.
Yeah. One of the things that intrigues me about the cognitive element is like, yeah, usually when you see those kind of positive effects, it's people taking like 20 grams a day. My
Hmm.
question that I would like to explore in the future is, so for example, I wrote a mass article a while back with a very controversial title, but it was basically asking like, is it possible that just every beta alanine study is underdosed? Because there was a
Yep.
really cool, really innovative meta regression project where they kind of did the math, plotted it out, and they're like, like a lot of times what you find with supplements, Helms, you've seen this. Supplement comes along, someone says, "What's the dose supposed to be?" And they say, "I don't know," and they pick one,
Hmm.
and then like the first
Yeah.
24 studies on a supplement all use that dose. Like we kind of gravitate toward heuristics rather than actual like, it's not like a medication where we actually do the like pharmacokinetic studies and like figure out exactly what the dosing should be per unit of body mass or whatever. Another one that kills me is like betaine. A lot of people are like, betaine's done. We shouldn't be studying it anymore. It's stupid. We've studied like literally one dose and we just did it like 10
Yeah.
times. So betaine's another one where I don't think we've really uncovered the full boundaries of what its potential could be as a supplement. That sounds hyperbolic. Betaine's not going to change your life as a, as a dietary supplement, but I do wonder if to some extent we've underestimated its potential in terms of magnitude of effect because we just haven't even bothered looking at some of these
Yep.
higher boundaries. But with beta alanine, again, you can make the argument that some of the studies where we assess its effects should have either, and that's the big key, either given a higher dose or done a longer dosing period, because there is this kind of accumulation as you work up to a steady state. One of the things I wonder is, a lot of times we'll say, yeah, if you want creatine and you want to saturate quickly, use this much. But if you take like 3 grams over time, you're going to essentially basically saturate the muscle. Part of me wonders if you're doing those 10 grams a day that's become popular, is it possible that you would maybe get some of those cognitive effects over longer time scales of just kind of giving your body time to let that all kind of saturate into the brain tissue? And when I say I have a question, I don't want to mislead listeners into thinking that I'm implying that's the case. It's a genuine
Mm.
question. I do not know.
Yeah.
And I just don't know enough about the dynamics of brain creatine. How much is it churning through on a daily basis? How much is getting in? And therefore, if we do 10 grams a day, what steady state kind of level of saturation will we eventually gravitate toward? Is that high
Mm.
enough? And it's just really hard because it's tough to get it. There just aren't that many studies that give you a good assessment of we took this dose of creatine for this long and here's how much it impacted brain levels and here's the corresponding impact on outcomes of interest. So I
Yep.
find the brain cognitive stuff, I'm of two minds about it. On one hand, I find it very intriguing and cool. On the other hand, I think it's one of those scenarios where the hype has put the cart well before the horse, where it's going to take the research a lot of time to catch up to the extreme level of hype that's associated with it. So unfortunately, we're going to have to buckle up and wait for that. But when it comes to muscle and dosing, that's a little bit more clear. And like I said, I think there's plenty of research showing if you're a smaller person, really if you're any size person for the most part, if you're average to small in size, 3 grams generally saturates the muscles after 3 or 4 weeks. If you want to go higher, you're more than welcome to. That would make even more sense if you had a large amount of muscle tissue and lean body mass. And the other thing to keep in mind with creatine is the only thing you're hurting if you say, I wouldn't mind getting there in a hurry, maintaining levels on the higher side. If you do 2 scoops and you go 10 grams a day, you're not hurting nobody. It's just a little bit more expensive than it ought to be. So It's really important as people get into Helms, all these debates about dosing with creatine. It's important to remember that we are not trying to thread a needle here. Creatine got really expensive during COVID. I think it's come back down to earth a little bit in terms of the raw material pricing. The supply chains were all wacky for a while there. But it seems to me like the prices come back down to earth based on what I hear from people. And we don't need to thread the needle that carefully. So if you want to go a little heavy with the scoop, it's really not a big deal. You're probably not going to change your life because you went with 7 grams over 5 and had the extra heaping scoop, but at the same time, you're not losing anything in doing so. Anything else on
it's
that?
still no, like even when it got expensive compared to other supplements, it wasn't that bad. But I think you can get creatine for $20 to $30 for like 500 grams. So it's pretty cheap.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's yeah. It's nice to have one of the good ones out there working at an affordable price. What more could you want, Helms?
Yes, sir.
Okay, into the live chat, by the way. Dexter Freeman said,
Oh, okay.
I love you guys, which, of course, we love you too. We
We love you
appreciate it.
too.
We got Colin said, tuning in live for once because of the holiday here in the United States. It is Labor Day, and I celebrate by laboring for the iron culture.
Hey, by the way, we have a Labor Day sale going on right now for Mass.
We
If
do
you're
indeed.
interested, yeah, monthly applications in strength sport. We retain the old name here at Iron Culture. Making applications of science simple. That's for the plebes, the people who don't know what's truly at the heart of the iron game and mass.
There's
But
a
for all
debate. No
you
one
iron
actually knows what the
cultists,
real name is anymore. There's a huge debate,
and
so you've weighed in.
we're chameleons. We just shift it towards whatever is going to increase that bottom line. We're pure capitalists here at Mass. If you want me to say it's mothers against prophylactic painkillers, if we're specifically in that environment, women who have children who do not like painkillers, that's Mass. And actually, that's MAP. I'm
Yeah,
clearly dieting.
you really lost me there.
Whoa, mothers against sensationalist, you know, swords. Like if you don't like if you like your basic sword,
Just
straight
a
up
big
sword,
piece of
no
iron.
engraving.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's here to
Can you
kill
make one
people. It
out of
doesn't
iron?
need to
It
be
should be steel,
fancy.
right? It should be steel.
You can have an iron sword. Just got to
Okay.
go back to the Iron Age.
Okay.
You know. But listen, we don't have this Three Musketeer fancy, risk engraving. Come on, like who do you think you are? And Mom, I'll always have a pure hunk of iron or steel that I'm going to whack somebody with. That is what Mass is about for that specific audience. But anyway, seriously, check it out. We are currently running a sale for Mass if people want to support the show, get in, and get in at a affordable price that won't break the pocketbook while you stay up to date with the latest research and maybe learn more about collagen in an upcoming episode from the Trexinator.
Big time, big time. Yeah, so folks, massresearchreview.com, really the home of the internet. That's the place you want to start your day and end your day. Unless you're a member of the Mass community, then you go to, what's the actual member site? Mass member.
Don't ask me that.
Yeah,
Mass member.
That's where
Yes,
you
there you
actually
go.
access the good stuff, the full articles in there.
Mhm.
All right, Helms, we got a couple questions in the live chat I'd like to give some attention to. Hopefully we answer these a little shorter, do a little kind of rapid fire for the live chat. So here's a question. It is, do you believe that muscular endurance is an emergent quality that is only comprised of basic strength and cardio? So basically, if you want muscular endurance, should you just be strong and have a good motor from a cardiovascular perspective, or do you think this is something we need to really directly and specifically train?
There's actually a really cool meta-analysis that was done on this. As I talk, I'm going to try to pull it up. But they found two different effects. They compared high load and low load training, and they found that when you are looking at a fixed load, so let's say you test 60 kilograms at the start and in the finish, using higher rep training to failure will produce greater number of reps at that fixed load. However, when you compare high load training to low load training for an absolute load, now we're saying, okay, we're going to use 50% of 1RM pre and post. That effect goes away. So I think muscular endurance is an emergent property of two factors. One is how strong are you? Because even if half Thor only does singles, and I do all of this muscular endurance training, you're going to think, oh man, Hafthor's going to get out of shape. He's not going to be able to do it. Listen, 50% of his 1RM is more than my 1RM. So I would literally lose a 50% of 1RM absolute load competition, right?
Yeah, if you guys
Um,
are gonna say, hey, we're gonna load up, 690 on the bar, do as many as you like, he's gonna win for muscular endurance.
yeah, so you can deadlift 500 kilos, Hafthor. Let's throw 250 on there. I'm like, I can do 250 if you allow me to do sumo, and if I train for the next 6 weeks for it. Can you come back? And by the way, not when I'm 80 kilos right now dieting.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be able to do it,
yeah,
right? So, my max conventional right now is 20 kilos less than that probably. So, but if we both put 60 kilos on the bar, maybe I'll be better, but I'm not sure because that is such a light load for him, that he
yeah,
will be able to do many, many reps. But if you compare yourself to yourself, rather than participants against participants, there are two factors. And I like the way they describe this as an emergent property. It's two things. One is how much ATP do you have to generate to move the load, right? So is it a light load for you or not? If it's light, you won't need as much energy to do it because each contraction is more efficient, right? And then how good are you at continuing to produce that muscular force without creating byproducts which impede continuous ability to revamp that system? So if you have to produce a whole lot of ATP all at once, you're not going to be able to keep doing it. That's just called, the phosphocreatine system, right? But if it's so light that you're basically starting at an effort load that is aerobic or in the glycolytic, range. Now it's how good are you at that energy system, which is buffering capacity, shuttling, all those things. So if you want to get maximally good at doing a lot of reps with 50% of 1RM, there's an argument that you probably want to do top singles and then like sets to failure in a slightly fatigued state with low loads because both are going to dictate how much you can lift and how many times.
yeah, yeah. It's important to recognize, if you take like a intro level X Phys course, which I'm teaching this semester it's been a while since I taught a pure
Oh,
X
cool.
Phys, so that's a lot of fun. But it's important to remember, like, there's actual machinery changing within the muscle when we train. Whether you're training
Yes.
for power, strength, endurance, you name it. We have actual things changing in the muscle in a meaningful way, in a measurable way. So we are changing, all this different enzymatic machinery associated with generating ATP. We're changing enzymes and in some cases even the density of proteins that are associated with clearing out metabolites, right? So it is true, like you said, of, if we hold everything else steady and just say, hey, we want you to be really good at doing a ton of reps with 50% of your max load, there are actual metabolic adaptations to that endurance type training that will help you, bolster that particular capacity. So, and that's what makes exercise science fun, is that we can actually look at all the diversity of adaptations to different types of training and try to thread the needle and induce what we're trying to induce.
Yep. And by the way, that specific meta-analysis that I was referring to is the influence of total repetitions per set on local muscular endurance, a systematic review with meta-analysis and meta-regression that was published in Science and Sports by Hackett and colleagues in 2022. So you want to check that one out.
Nice. All right, Helms, another one from the live chat. If muscle hypertrophy has potential to contribute to strength gains, could the same be said for athletic performance like speed and power? So is hypertrophy also carrying over to things like speed and power?
To some degree, but I think there is a drop off each time you get further away from the target performance.
Yeah.
So, for example, how strong do you need to be for the athletic performance? That's the question,
Yeah.
right? All athletic performance, to go back to our power related question, exists somewhere along the load velocity spectrum. So, if your athletic performance is Olympic weightlifting, then absolutely, the bigger you get, the better you will be. If we're talking about basketball, a 600-pound squat, 500-pound squat, you can probably generate sufficient amount of impulse to have, higher jump heights, sprint times, and then at a certain point, Your time is spent better elsewhere.
Yeah.
And the question is then, okay, that was actually me talking about strength. Do you need to be jacked as hell to squat 500 versus 600? Yes, in both cases. But what degree of jackness do you need to be? And where actually is that threshold? So I'd say, if we're talking about a basketball player, 300, 400 pound squat is probably all you're going to need. And then how muscular do you need to be? Not that muscular for these folks. And
Yeah. And
that's kind of where it ends up.
if I may make a case getting out of physiology, because who cares? Let's get into good old free market capitalism. If there was if the path to being an NBA superstar ran through having a 500-pound squat, we would have figured that out by now, because there's enough money dangling on the table there to say,
oh yeah,
you know what? And of course, to get up to the starting line, by the way, you better be 6'8", or taller. But, we would see these guys going head to head, just trying to slap more plates on the bar with these huge squats. We've kind of figured out the level of strength and muscularity necessary for excelling in the NBA. And especially when it comes to like upper body muscularity, there is the classic Kevin Durant, who is an all-time great, absolute superstar in basketball, made a lot of headlines at the NBA Combine, because instead of repping out 225 like they do in football, in the NBA they do 185, and he had 0 on that particular competition. So I know, Helms, that kills you inside to know that is what elite athleticism looks like. But the results speak for themselves. He's an absolute... You watch him play basketball, it seems like he is just working with fundamentally unfair advantages. He is a killer at the sport. And I can say, now that I've been around like some of the most elite college level basketball players who end up going on to be ultra elite pro level players, does strength and muscularity play some role? Yes. When guys come in college programs and they are just an absolute twig, the scouts from the NBA say, hey, this is not going to work. And it's mostly for durability more so than it is for performance. Yeah. So you need to put a little bit of meat on your bones to survive. I think, what do they play, like an 80-something game season? Games every couple nights, sometimes a few, back-to-backs. So their big thing is, we need to put enough muscle on you that you're not going to fall and break, basically. But yeah, I mean, like you said, Helms, it really comes down to saying, to what extent will muscularity help me perform in this sport? If it's a sport where there's a deep talent pool and some very obvious incentives for being very good at it, one of the most important things you can do is look around, and they're going to let you know, right? So, Helms, does it behoove me to be muscular as a defensive lineman or a running back in football? Yes, clearly it does, sure, right? It does. So yeah, when it comes to, again, a sport with a very, very deep talent pool, the success will leave very obvious clues. And like you said,
and what you're describing as well is not only the kind of the prospective, what's going to help me get there, but also the constraints.
Yeah.
What are the things that are going to constrain performance? And in elite level sport, it is opportunity cost, time availability, and injury, right? And that's a great example. This is why endurance athletes lift weights. It's not just for, the kind of the endurance component we talked about earlier, but it makes them less likely to get hurt running. Like, that's why Mike Zerdos currently does most of his lifting. And exactly the case, like you said, with basketball, you're playing a lot, you're playing frequently, it's high impact. And if you can improve landing mechanics, distribute that over more total tissue, have a little bit of extra control around that ACL when you cut different directions, all to the G. And but you don't need to be able to bench even body weight, apparently, Kevin Durant. So
yeah. And and then, of course, just because the question specifically mentioned things like, I think it mentioned speed as one of those things, depending on how extreme you want to get with the demands of the sport, there's going to be some sports where they just downright say, dude, I don't want you carrying a lot of extra muscle. So if the question is, to what extent does hypertrophy carry over to speed and performance? If you're running marathons, do you really want to have a heavier upper body than you need? I think the
Hmm.
vast majority of folks would probably say no.
Yeah, and that is actually a really, really good point. As you move through the power and endurance spectrum, and say from track and field to ultra endurance, there is a greater cumulative cost to the just the weight of your body.
Yeah.
And even though I don't actually think that the energy system demands of an ultra endurance athlete makes sense to be on a ketogenic diet, the fact that you can simply carry less food because of the energy density on high fat diets, there is a strong community of ketogenic or very high fat, moderate carb approaches in the endurance athlete community just because, yeah, maybe I don't have that fifth gear if I'm an ultra endurance athlete. It doesn't matter because we've even seen like elite race walkers do poor on ketogenic diets. Some of the classic study by Louise Burke, and it's like, oh man, we really ran out of opportunities here. We can't even get better at walking, right? But that's slower than portions of an ultra. But when you're doing multiple days of endurance training and you have an additional kilogram or two on you, that adds up. But when you're only doing a 100-meter sprint and the tissue you're adding to your body is also generating more impulse into the ground and increasing your block start, and then you just need to keep carrying it through, that's why sprinters fucking jacked, you know? So
Yeah,
there you go.
absolutely. Uh, the Greek Trojan in the live chat says, "My family no longer celebrates holidays together because of the iron culture slash the mass debate got too heated. So I am both
Mm.
sorry and pleased to hear that because it shows you care, and that's what it's all about." Speaking of running long distances, someone asked about my update on the road to Athens post surgeries. My old quest to run a marathon. I actually have been talking lately about getting back into running once I'm able to from this. The thing is, I'm still a couple weeks away from being cleared to run with my most recent surgery, but I actually am intrigued at the idea of. I think Mike Zordos and I need to go head to head in a marathon. I think that would be a tremendous experience.
Oh, look at that.
Huge
Two
caveat.
guys who, correct me, your best squat is 500 pounds, right?
Yes.
His best squat is also right around 500 pounds. You're both ex powerlifters turned endurance athlete hopefuls. He's got a head start on you. He hasn't had to deal with the
Big
same,
time.
surgeries. But if you are calling out Mike Z, that is amazing.
Well,
I am
he would
excited.
crush me because he actually trains hard and smart and all that stuff. But I do want to run a marathon, and so maybe we'll make something fun of that. He's it seems like he's been crushing his training. He does it at 2 in the morning because if you wait till 4 a.m. in Florida, it'll already be 170 degrees and humid. So if we ever ran the same marathon, he'd have to come up to my neck of the woods. I'm not going down to Florida unless it's
No.
a Christmas Day marathon on a particularly cool Christmas day.
Dude, I did a set of like 8 at an RPE 7 of front squats, and I got heat stroke while I was training at his place. So,
It's yeah,
yeah.
it's really different, man. It is a fundamentally different kind of heat. I do want to acknowledge in the chat that Colin mentioned that they've read conflicting opinions about whether or not those collagen peptides can stay intact through digestion. I agree, Colin. That's why I kind of said like, hey, I've seen things alluding to this evidence, which I have not read in depth. So I do want to revisit that. I think it's time for me to dive back into collagen soon.
Yeah, neither one of us is Keith Barr to have a confident answer to that off the cuff. So I'm looking forward to you writing about it if you've dug in.
Yeah. And then the last thing I want to mention, one last question here from 12 Piece and a Soda. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. Same question asker. Actually, Helms, I'm stammering here, but let me throw another one in there really quick. Just like a very, very quick answer from you, Helms,
I got you. I'll be quick.
for your friend from Australia. So it's morning time. You have that kinship. Fueled by Forge asked, creatine, do you still have it during peak week or what do you do? Do you take it out?
I normally just take it out in the last few days
Mm-hmm.
because I know that muscle creatine stores will be very high, but I'm not taking in something that will potentially result in any kind of water retention. It's a better safe than sorry, and there's literally no downside because you will have almost zero change in muscle creatine content in 3 days.
Yeah.
But you aren't acutely taking anything that might result in temporary, water storage in the same way that, a carbohydrate excess would.
Yep, why not? Nothing to lose there. Shout out to Siraj with the hashtag TrexNation. Haven't seen that one in a minute. I appreciate that. But the last question here was going to be, Helms, do you have any simple tips that come to mind when it comes to reducing food focus during a diet? Right now you're dieting. It's been a while since I did a real diet. So I'm curious, are there any strategies that you personally use if you find that your food focus is getting too high, or maybe there's some preemptive things you do to avoid letting it get high?
Absolutely. I think the most important thing is to aim for higher levels of productivity while dieting.
Smart.
Focus is a limited quantity, and it will, the more idle time you have, the more it will shift to food when you are hungry. So I think that's really important. Is I try to work ahead. I find I get more focused during diets as well. So I've actually written both my mass articles for this upcoming month, Trex, in advance
Whoa.
for me traveling.
Look at you.
Yeah, that's not something that normally occurs. Normally, it's me apologizing in Slack about being 3 days late. So that is the main thing I would recommend. And then a very close second is having a meal rhythm, a consistent pattern and lifestyle of when you eat, what you eat, and make it boring and consistent and look like a bro. And absolutely, you could fit more things. You could play macro Tetris. You could eat highly palatable foods that are low calories and maximize everything. But what does it require to do that? Changes in your behavior day to day, chasing your cravings, being excited about food, thinking about food, and shopping specifically for these low calorie, high palatability food options. And invariably, having coached over 100 people plus to the stage and having done this thing, it'll be my 6th season, 20 shows this year, and being in and around the community for 20 years now. I went to my first bodybuilding show in 2005. It makes it worse. It is not an advantage. It's something to do on a whim, maybe. Like, man, I'm really craving ice cream, and here's the distant third strategy. So, just to clarify, be productive and have a meal rhythm that requires no decisions, and you just do the same thing day to day. And make very easy, simple food swaps as you need to cut calories. Lower calorie fruit, low fat option versus normal fat option, non-fat option versus fat, unsweetened versus sweetened, get some Splenda, that type of thing. So it feels the same qualitatively as far as what you're eating. And also keeping your food volume high, even though the calorie density is going down. Distant third, though, is sometimes you're going to get so hungry that you're distracted from your productivity. And that even though you have this consistent meal rhythm, you're like, man, I would really like to eat more of that same salad that I just had, even though you've killed your kind of hyperpalatable palate and you're not stressed by it. And this is where sometimes it is worth hunting down that craving that just won't leave you alone. Like if you saw somebody eat some ice cream, you've got a refeed coming up, you're doing fine. Grab a tub of Halo Top. Do it, get it out of your system. It won't get out of your system, but you will at least feel like you have the agency to do it, and you will feel less restrained. But I generally don't do that. What I do instead is I grab a couple pieces of gum and I have another diet soda that doesn't have caffeine in it. And I find that just takes the edge off and just gives me more time to kind of get back to baseline. I find sometimes I finish meals and then it just takes longer for satisfaction to set in. And then before my next meal, the hunger will come in earlier. So it's like I don't get the same post-meal satisfaction, or it takes longer to settle in. And then I get an earlier, and my meals will start to get close together, and then you're left at 8 p.m. with, I ate dinner 4 hours ago, and now I'm starving, and you don't want that either. And I think you can kind of bridge those meals together with some sugar-free gum, some diet Sprite, that type of thing. But that is... I think a lot of people will leverage that first whenever they get asked this question. Like, what are these little tips and trades? And they are truly, truly, truly 1/10 of the effectiveness of the first two strategies I mentioned.
Yeah. No, and I think that's also good advice for, if you are someone who hates taking rest days, even though you need them, if you're somebody who, like has a tendency to push too hard in the gym, or if you're somebody who is like maybe you need to take a layoff to recover from an injury, as I currently am, it's really nice to be able to lean into like just go do something that strikes you as being productive and mentally engaging. And it doesn't have to be that you're going to go take on a second job or do an extra project. It doesn't have to be occupational work necessarily, but go build a birdhouse. Do some kind of project or hobby that is legitimately engaging enough that you will forget about food to the extent it's feasible, right? So, for me, whenever I totally echo like the best prep I ever had. I actually wasn't planning on doing a prep because I was under the false belief you need to do a prep when work isn't crazy so that you can you don't want to mess up something big at work, But what ended up happening was I got so busy with work that I was like dieting by accident because I barely had time to eat. And I basically, before I knew it, was halfway to stage weight. And I was like, I think I'm going to do a prep. I made like one little food swap and just got super busy. And I was like, honestly, like I'm prepping without even knowing it. I'm halfway there. Why not get to the finish line? So the only downside was I didn't have like a legit dedicated like bulking period before it. So I didn't end up having as much muscle on stage as I would have liked. But it's amazing what being busy can do in terms of making the dieting process a million times easier. And the same thing goes with when you're stuck out of the gym and you want more than anything to be back in there. Get busy, take on a new project, and before you know it, you'll be back in the saddle. All right, Helms, one more time, can we give a little bit of love to our good friends at Elite FTS?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you missed it in the beginning, we have a great partnership now with Elite FTS, and they have a code, 10% off pretty much everything they've got. There may be some exceptions to that, but definitely use MRR10 when you go to Elite FTS. They've got great stuff from specialty bars to stuff as simple as bands that are really high quality, or like Trex's personal experience wrist wraps that will literally last until the end of days.
Yeah.
That you can keep using. So it's a true privilege to be working with Elite FTS. Dave Tate, big shout out, and can't recommend their equipment highly enough. We both Trex and I have Elite FTS equipment and have been loyal members of their brand because they're primarily about education. They don't need to be doing that.
Yeah.
They could just sell stuff, but Dave Tate is all about elevating the community. So big shout out to Elite FTS. Use code MMR10.
MRR10.
Sorry, MRR10. I am clearly dieting, and that is going to be in the show notes. So MRR10, and you can get 10% off.
All right. And while you're supporting companies, hey, why not support the show, right? So if you want to support Iron Culture, be sure to like, rate, subscribe, review, share it with a friend, all that kind of stuff. Submit questions either by joining live or going to massresearchreview.com/ironculture, where you could submit questions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We love answering them on the air. And of course, the number one way you can support the show is by becoming a member of the Mass community. We have a big Labor Day sale going on right now. You can go become a member over at massresearchreview.com. That does it for tonight. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and we will be back with another episode in 7 days.